The dust storm hit Redemption Creek like the devil's own fury, turning the afternoon sky into a churning wall of red earth and grit. Jed Carter pulled his bandana up over his nose, squinting through the haze as his horse, Buckwheat, snorted in protest. The animal's hooves clattered against the wooden boardwalk as Jed guided him toward the nearest hitching post. Through the swirling chaos, he could barely make out the weathered sign swinging violently on its chains. Maribel's Kitchen, best grub this side of the Pecos. The establishment looked more like a converted saloon than a proper eating house, with its crooked shutters and paint peeling like old scabs. But in a storm like this, any port would do. Jed had been riding for 3 days straight, coming down from his ranch in the Northern Valley to purchase supplies. At 32, he'd seen enough of the world to know when trouble was brewing. And this storm carried more than just dust. It carried the kind of tension that made horses skittish and men reach for their irons. He pushed through the heavy oak door, and the first thing that hit him wasn't the blessed relief from the wind, but the sound of breaking crockery and a woman's voice that could strip bark off a pine tree. "I said, get your filthy hands off me, you whiskey-soaked excuse for a man." A plate sailed past Jed's head, shattering against the doorframe. He ducked instinctively, his hand moving to the Colt .45 at his hip before he caught himself. Through the dim lamplight filtering through dust-caked windows, he saw her. Maribel O'Hara stood behind the counter like a red-headed fury, wielding a cast-iron skillet with the confidence of a cavalry officer with a saber. Her emerald eyes blazed with a fire that had nothing to do with the cooking stove behind her. 3 cowboys, clearly deep in their cups despite the early hour, had her cornered between the counter and the kitchen door. Now, Maribel, slurred the largest of them, a thick-necked brute with a badge pinned crookedly to his vest, a deputy, by the looks of it. "We're just looking for some special service. Heard you provide all kinds of comfort to lonely men. The only service you'll get from me is this skillet upside your thick skull." "Deputy Garrett." She swung the pan in a wide arc, forcing them to step back. "Now get out before I forget you wear a badge." Garrett laughed, an ugly sound that made Jed's jaw tighten. "Badge means I keep the peace, sweetheart, and disturbing the peace is a jailable offense, especially for a woman with your reputation." The other 2 cowboys flanked her, grinning like coyotes circling wounded prey. One of them, a scrawny fellow with bad teeth, made a grab for her arm. "Come on, Wildcat. Everyone knows the wildest cook in town ain't just talking about your chili recipe." That's when Jed stepped forward. Seems the lady made herself clear. His voice cut through the tension like a well-honed blade, low and steady. Years of practice had taught him that the quieter you spoke, the more folks paid attention. All 3 men turned, and Garrett's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "This ain't your concern. Stranger, best you turn around and walk back out that door." Jed moved further into the room, his spurs singing a soft metallic tune with each step. He kept his hand away from his gun, but his stance spoke volumes. "Can't rightly do that. My mama raised me to never turn my back on a lady in distress." "Lady?" The scrawny one laughed. "Mister, you clearly ain't from around here. This here's Maribel O'Hara. She's about as much a lady as a Mustang is a show pony." "Don't make no difference to me what you call her." Jed positioned himself between Maribel and the men, noting the exits, the overturned chairs, the distance to cover, old habits. What matters is she asked you to leave. Politely, even. Politely. Garrett touched his forehead where a lump was already forming. "She threw a damn plate at my head." "From where I'm standing, looks like she missed. That strikes me as polite enough." Behind him, Jed heard Maribel's sharp intake of breath. Whether surprise or anger, he couldn't tell. The storm outside hammered against the windows, and dust sifted through the cracks in the walls like flour through a sieve. Garrett's hand drifted toward his sidearm. "You looking to dance, cowboy?" "No, sir." Jed's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. But I've done my share of dancing, and I remember all the steps. Question is, are you boys drunk enough to test whether I've gone rusty? Something in his eyes must have given them pause. Maybe it was the way he stood, weight perfectly balanced, or how his gun hand hung loose but ready. Maybe it was the faded cavalry insignia on his coat, or the way he didn't seem worried despite being outnumbered 3-1. The scrawny cowboy was the first to lose his nerve. Come on, Garrett, we can find entertainment elsewhere. This place serves lousy food anyway. Lousy! Maribel's voice cracked like a whip. You wouldn't know good food if it walked up and introduced itself. The only thing lousy in here is your manners and your smell. Easy there, Jed murmured without turning around. The last thing he needed was her reigniting the situation. Garrett studied Jed for a long moment, then spat on the floor. This ain't over, stranger, and you, O'Hara. You can't hide behind every drifter that blows through town. Sheriff Hanley's gonna hear about this. Tell Walt Hanley he knows where to find me. Maribel shot back. Same place I was when I poured hot coffee in his lap last month. The three men filed out, Garrett pausing at the door to give them both a long, meaningful look before disappearing into the storm. The door slammed shut behind them, rattling on its hinges. Jed waited a full 10 seconds before relaxing his stance. Only then did he turn to face the woman he'd just defended. Up close, she was even more striking than he'd first thought. Not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too sharp, her expression too fierce for that. But there was something about her that commanded attention. Her red hair was pinned up in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped during the confrontation. Her dress was simple brown calico, protected by a grease-stained apron that had seen better days. Flour dusted her freckled forearms like snow. I didn't ask for your help, she said, still gripping the skillet like a weapon. No, ma'am, you didn't. I can handle myself. I don't doubt it. That was a fine swing you took at them. She studied him suspiciously, as if looking for mockery, then slowly lowered the pan. You're not from around here. No, ma'am. Got a small spread up north, near Juniper Ridge. That's 3 days' ride in good weather. She moved behind the counter, setting the skillet on the stove with a clang. What brings you to our little slice of purgatory? Supplies. Didn't count on the storm, or on playing hero. Jed removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair liberally dusted with trail dirt. Just seemed like the right thing to do. She snorted, a surprisingly unladylike sound. The right thing doesn't carry much weight in Redemption Creek. Mr. Carter, Jed Carter. Well, Mr. Carter, I appreciate the gesture, but you've likely bought yourself a heap of trouble. Deputy Garrett holds grudges like some men hold liquor, badly and for too long. I'll manage. Famous last words. She turned to the stove, lifting pot lids and checking contents with practiced efficiency. Since you're here and the storm's not letting up, might as well eat. Least I can do for my would-be knight in dusty armor. Jed settled onto a stool at the counter, noting how she kept the skillet within easy reach. Smart woman. Much obliged. What's good today? Everything I cook is good, she said tartly, then added, but the beef stew's fresh, and I've got cornbread that hasn't gone too stale. Coffee's been on since morning, so it could probably strip paint, but it's hot. Sounds perfect. She ladled stew into a bowl, her movements efficient and graceful despite the lingering tension. As she set it before him, along with a sizable chunk of cornbread, their eyes met. Hers were the deepest green he'd ever seen, like forest pools with secrets at the bottom. Why'd you do it? She asked quietly. Really? Jed picked up his spoon, considering the question. Man spends enough time alone with his thoughts. He starts to figure out what matters. Seeing someone bullied has never sat right with me. Even if that someone is the wildest cook in town. There was bitterness in her voice. Old hurt, scarred over but not healed. Even then, She poured coffee from a battered pot, the liquid black as midnight and twice as dangerous looking. You know what they say about me? Can't say as I do, and can't say as I care. He took a sip of coffee and tried not to wince. It was indeed strong enough to strip paint. Good coffee. He lied. That startled a laugh out of her. Short and sharp. You're a terrible liar. Jed Carter. Been told that before. The storm continued its assault on the building, and somewhere a loose board banged rhythmically against the wall. They existed in a strange bubble of calm, the eye of more than one storm. I'm not what they say, she said suddenly, then looked angry at herself for caring what he thought. Not entirely, anyway. Didn't figure you were. You don't even know what they say. Don't need to. I've found that folks who gossip the loudest usually have the least to say worth hearing. She studied him again, this time with something like wonder. You're a strange man. Mr. Carter? Just tired, ma'am. Tired of ugliness. Tired of folks tearing each other down for sport. He took a bite of stew and his eyes widened. This is excellent. This time her smile was genuine, transforming her face. Now that's honest. Yes, ma'am, it is. Best meal I've had in months. They fell into comfortable silence, broken only by the storm and the occasional scrape of spoon against bowl. Jed found himself stealing glances at her as she moved about the kitchen, wiping down surfaces, adjusting dampers on the stove, performing the 1,000 small tasks that kept an establishment running. There was a story here. He could sense it. A woman alone, running a restaurant in a rough frontier town, with a reputation that preceded her and deputies who felt entitled to more than a meal. But he'd learned long ago that everyone had their secrets, their reasons for ending up where they were. He certainly had his... The door burst open again, bringing a fresh gust of dust and wind. A young boy, maybe 12 years old, stumbled in, eyes wide with fear. Miss Maribel. Miss Maribel. They're coming back with more men. Deputy Garrett's rounding up a posse, saying you assaulted an officer of the law. Maribel's face went pale beneath her freckles. How many, Tommy? 6, maybe 7. They're liquoring up at the Broken Spoke, working up their courage. Jed set down his spoon slowly, deliberately. Here it was. Then, the trouble he'd known was coming the moment he'd stepped between her and those cowboys. He could walk away now, slip out the back before they arrived. He was just a stranger passing through, and, after all, this wasn't his fight. Except somehow, it was... Tommy, he said calmly. You know if there's a back way out of here? The boy nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, through the kitchen and out the alley. Good. I want you to show Miss Maribel that way. Get her somewhere safe. I'm not running from my own restaurant. Maribel's eyes flashed. This is my place, my home. And it'll still be here tomorrow if you're smart about this. Jed stood, settling his hat on his head. Ma'am, I've seen what liquored up men in a mob can do. Pride ain't worth what they've got in mind. What about you? He checked his Colt, making sure it sat loose in the holster. I'll have a word with them. Explain the misunderstanding. 7 against 1. That's not courage. Mr. Carter, that's stupidity. Maybe so. He moved toward the door. But I've been both before and lived to tell about it. Jed, his first name on her lips, stopped him cold. Why are you doing this? He turned back, meeting those green eyes one more time. Because your stew was worth it, he said simply. Now go, please. For a moment, he thought she'd argue further. Then she grabbed a few essentials, took Tommy's hand, and headed for the kitchen. At the doorway, she paused. Try not to die, Cowboy. I'd hate to lose the only honest customer I've had all month. Then she was gone, leaving Jed alone with the storm and the approaching thunder of boots on boardwalk. He positioned himself behind the counter, giving himself cover and clear sight lines to the door. His hand rested on his gun butt. and his mind went to that quiet place it always found before violence. The storm howled on, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear drunken voices raised in anticipation of violence. The wildest cook in town might have started this dance, but Jed Carter would make sure he was the one who finished it. The door flew open one more time, and Deputy Garrett stood silhouetted against the swirling dust, backed by 6 hard-looking men. "Where is she, stranger?" Jed smiled, cold as winter frost. "Seems you boys missed her, but I'm still here, if you're looking for that dance we discussed." The morning sun crept over Juniper Ridge like a cautious visitor, painting the weathered timber of Jed's ranch house in shades of gold and amber. 3 days had passed since the incident at Maribel's kitchen. 3 days since he'd faced down Deputy Garrett and his drunken posse. The confrontation had ended without bloodshed, thanks to the timely arrival of an older, wiser deputy who'd sent the mob packing with threats of reporting them to the county marshal. Jed stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand, watching his small herd graze in the valley below. 20 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and enough land to keep a man busy but not wealthy. It was a modest operation, but it was his, bought with years of dangerous work he'd rather forget. The sound of wagon wheels on the rough trail made him turn. Visitors were rare out here, which was exactly how he preferred it. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail, then relaxed as he recognized the figure holding the reins. Maribel O'Hara sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, managing the team of mules with practiced ease. She wore a different dress today, dark blue that brought out the copper in her hair, and a man's wide-brimmed hat that looked oddly fetching on her. The wagon bed held what appeared to be enough supplies to stock a small army. "Miss O'Hara," Jed called out as she brought the wagon to a stop near his barn. "You're a long way from town." "And you're a hard man to find, Mr. Carter." She set the brake and climbed down without waiting for assistance. "Took some doing to get directions. Folks in town seem to think you're some kind of hermit." "Can't say they're wrong." He descended the porch steps slowly, unsure of this unexpected visit. "What brings you all the way out here?" She walked around to the back of the wagon, lowering the gate with a bang. "I pay my debts. You stood up for me, risked your neck for a stranger. Where I come from, that means something. I told you, the stew was payment enough." "The stew was before you faced down 7 armed men." She began unloading covered pots and baskets. "This is after. Now. Are you going to stand there gawking, or are you going to help a lady with these supplies?" Despite himself, Jed found his mouth quirking into a smile. "Yes, ma'am." Together they unloaded the wagon, a ham wrapped in cheesecloth, jars of preserves, fresh bread that still held warmth from the oven, pickled vegetables, and enough baked goods to last a month. She'd even brought a sack of real coffee beans, not the chicory-stretched substitute most folks made do with. "This is too much," Jed protested as they carried the bounty into his kitchen. "Nonsense. I've seen bachelor kitchens before. Bet you've been living on beans and hardtack." She looked around the sparse but clean space, noting the few dishes, the basic supplies. "Where do you keep your skillets?" "Why? Because I'm making you breakfast. Don't argue," she added as he opened his mouth. "I drove 3 hours to get here. Least you can do is let me use your stove." Jed watched, bemused, as she took over his kitchen with the same efficiency she'd shown in her restaurant. Within minutes, she had bacon sizzling, eggs ready to crack, and biscuits warming in the oven he rarely used. "You always invite yourself into strange men's homes?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Only the ones foolish enough to save me from a mob." She flipped the bacon with practiced ease. "Besides, you're not exactly a stranger anymore. The whole town's talking about the mysterious Cowboy who backed down Garrett's gang without firing a shot." "Is that what they're saying?" "Among other things." She cracked eggs into the pan, the sizzle filling the comfortable silence. "Some say you're a former gunslinger. Others think you're a deserter from the cavalry, old Mrs. Hutchins is convinced you're an outlaw hiding from the law. And what do you think? She turned to face him, spatula in hand. I think you're a man with a past who wants to be left alone. Problem is, you picked the wrong woman to rescue if that was your plan. How's that? Because now I'm curious. She turned back to the stove. And I've been told I'm stubborn as a mule when I'm curious. They ate at his simple pine table, the morning light streaming through clean windows. The food was excellent. Of course, bacon crispy but not burned. Eggs perfect. Biscuits light as clouds. Jed found himself eating with more appetite than he'd had in months. Tell me about your ranch, Maribel said, spreading preserves on a biscuit. Not much to tell. 160 acres, mostly grazing land. Small herd, but good bloodlines. I sell to the army posts mainly. I must get lonely out here. That's kind of the point. She studied him over her coffee cup. Running from something or toward something? Maybe both. He met her gaze steadily. What about you? How does a woman end up running a restaurant alone in a town like Redemption Creek? Her expression shuddered slightly. That's a longer story than we have time for. I've got nothing but time. She set down her cup carefully. My husband brought me out west 5 years ago. Patrick O'Hara, full of dreams about striking it rich in the goldfields. Her laugh held no humor. Instead, he struck the bottom of a bottle. Repeatedly. Jed remained quiet, sensing there was more. He lost everything gambling, our savings, our wagon, even my grandmother's ring. Then one night, he bet me in a card game. She said it matter-of-factly, but her knuckles were white around the cup handle. Lost that too. Christ! The winner was persistent in trying to collect. Patrick sobered up enough to be horrified. Tried to call it off. There was a fight. She took a breath. Patrick died. The other man too. Self-defense. The sheriff said, since I was the one holding the knife when it was over. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the stove cooling. That's how I became the wildest cook in town, she continued. The widow who killed 2 men over a poker debt. Never mind that I was defending myself. Never mind that one of them was my husband. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. In a town like Redemption Creek, a woman with blood on her hands might as well wear a scarlet letter. I'm sorry. Don't be. I survived. Opened the restaurant with the money I found hidden in Patrick's boots. Ironic, considering he'd sworn we were broke. I make good food, and most folks are willing to overlook my reputation for a decent meal. She stood, beginning to clear the dishes. But men like Garrett, like Sheriff Hanley, they see me as fair game. A woman who's already fallen can't fall any further. Right? Jed stood too, gently taking the plates from her hands. You're not fallen. You're standing. There's a difference. Something shifted in her expression, a vulnerability quickly hidden. You're an unusual man. Jed Carter. So you keep saying... They washed dishes together, falling into an easy rhythm. Through the window. Jed could see his horses in the corral, dozing in the morning sun. It was peaceful, domestic in a way that made something in his chest tighten with an emotion he didn't want to examine too closely. I should teach you to shoot, he said suddenly. I beg your pardon? A skillet's all well and good, but you need something with more range. You know how to handle a gun. Patrick showed me how to load one. Never got around to the shooting part. Then we'll start there. He dried his hands on a flour sack towel. Come on. He led her out behind the barn where he'd set up a makeshift range, bottles and cans lined up on a fence rail, backed by a natural earthen berm. From a locked chest on the porch, he retrieved a smaller revolver, a .32 Smith & Wesson that would fit her hands better than his Colt. First rule, he said, checking the cylinder, and never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. For the next hour, he taught her the basics: stance, grip, sight alignment, trigger control. She was a quick study, approaching the lesson with the same focused intensity she brought to cooking. Her first shots went wide, but by the dozenth round, she was hitting cans with regularity. "You're a natural," Jed said, watching her knock over 3 cans in succession. "I have a good teacher." She lowered the weapon, turning to face him. They were standing close enough that he could see gold flecks in her green eyes, smell the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon that clung to her from the morning's baking. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then a horse whinnied from the corral, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. "I should go," Maribel said, handing back the revolver. "It's a long drive back, and I need to open for the dinner crowd." "Keep it," Jed said impulsively. "The gun, you need it more than I do." "I can't accept that." "Call it a loan, then, until you can get your own." She hesitated, then nodded, tucking the weapon into her basket. They walked back to the wagon together, Jed helping her load the empty pots and baskets. "Thank you," she said once she was back on the wagon seat. "For the lesson, for everything." "Thank you for breakfast and for the company." She gathered the reins, then paused. "You could come to town more often, for supplies, meals, whatever you need." "Might do that. I make excellent pot roast on Wednesdays." "I'll keep that in mind." She clicked to the mules, starting the wagon rolling. At the gate, she turned back. "Jed, whatever you're running from, I hope someday you can stop." Before he could respond, she was gone, the wagon disappearing down the trail in a cloud of dust. Jed stood watching until even the dust had settled, his hand absently rubbing the spot over his heart where something had cracked open. Just a little. That night, he sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch felt different somehow. Not empty, exactly, but expectant, as if it were waiting for something or someone to fill the quiet spaces. In the kitchen, the lingering scent of bacon and biscuits seemed to whisper possibilities he'd thought were lost to him forever. He'd built this isolation carefully, brick by brick, keeping the world and its complications at arm's length. But now, a red-haired woman with fierce green eyes and secrets of her own had driven 3 hours to cook him breakfast, had stood in his kitchen like she belonged there, had trusted him enough to share her story. Dark as it was, Jed raised his glass to the stars. Not quite a toast, not quite a prayer. Tomorrow, he'd check the fence lines, tend the horses, go about his routine. But Wednesday, he might just have a taste for pot roast. The Wednesday pot roast had become a standing appointment. For 6 weeks now. Jed had made the ride into Redemption Creek, timing his arrival for the quiet hour between lunch and dinner service. He'd help Maribel with heavy lifting, fix whatever needed fixing around the restaurant, and they'd share a meal before the evening crowd arrived. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that the rumors started in earnest. "Did you hear about Eliza Pemberton, Mrs.?" Hutchins whispered loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear, her companion nodding eagerly over their tea. "Says she saw that O'Hara woman riding out to the Carter Ranch at dawn, alone, unchaperoned." Jed's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on the loose hinge he was repairing. Across the room, Maribel's movements at the stove became deliberately measured, her back rigid. "Well, what do you expect, Mrs.?" Hutchins continued, warming to her subject. "A woman like that, with her history. Of course, she'd set her cap for the first man to show interest, probably hoping to trap him into marriage." The other woman, Mrs. Doyle, leaned in conspiratorially. "I heard she visits him every week now, spending hours alone together. It's scandalous." "More than scandalous, Mrs." Hutchins sniffed. "It's calculating. Mark my words, she's working her wiles on that poor man. First she got him to defend her from Deputy Garrett. Now this, she knows exactly what she's doing." The screwdriver slipped, gouging Jed's thumb. He swore under his breath, and both women turned to stare at him with identical expressions of disapproval and interest. "Ladies," he said evenly, wrapping his bleeding thumb in his bandana. "Miss O'Hara has been kind enough to sell me supplies for my ranch, unless you'd prefer I starve. I'll continue to do business with the only restaurant in town." "Business, Mrs." Hutchins repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of that excuse. "Is that what they're calling it now?" "Yes," Maribel said clearly, emerging from the kitchen with coffee pot in hand. "Business, Mr. Carter pays for his meals and supplies. I provide them, just like I'm providing you ladies with tea and gossip space." She refilled their cups with a smile sharp enough to cut. "Speaking of which, that'll be 50 cents each." The women huffed and bustled out after leaving their coins. Whispering furiously, Maribel stared after them, her knuckles white around the coffee pot handle. "I'm making it worse for you," Jed said quietly. "No." She set the pot down harder than necessary. "They are. You're just giving them fresh ammunition." She moved to examine his thumb. "Let me see that." "It's nothing. It's bleeding." She took his hand in hers, unwrapping the bandana with gentle fingers. "Come on, I've got iodine in the kitchen." As she cleaned and bandaged the cut, Jed studied her face. There were new lines around her eyes, a tightness to her mouth that hadn't been there before. "How bad has it gotten?" She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Mrs. Pemberton pulled her daughter out of my restaurant last week. Said she didn't want her exposed to impropriety. The minister's wife crossed the street to avoid speaking to me, and someone left a rather crude message painted on my back door." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's not your problem." She tied off the bandage with unnecessary force. "I've dealt with worse." "Maribel, don't." She pulled away, busying herself with putting away the medical supplies. "Don't you dare apologize for being kind to me. That's what they want, to isolate me completely. I won't give them the satisfaction." The bell above the door chimed, and they both turned to see Sheriff Walt Hanley entering with 2 companions. The sheriff was a big man running to fat, with cold gray eyes and a badge he polished more than his reputation. His companions were the usual sort, hard cases who did whatever Hanley told them for whiskey money. "Well, well," Hanley said, his gaze sliding between them like oil. "The hermit and the harlot. How cozy." Jed straightened slowly. "Sheriff, something we can do for you." "Just making my rounds." Hanley helped himself to a seat at the counter. "Heard there've been some complaints about this establishment. Moral turpitude, disturbing the peace, that sort of thing." "That's ridiculous," Maribel said. "I run a clean restaurant." "Do you now?" Hanley's smile was unpleasant. "That's not what I hear. Multiple witnesses say you've been entertaining men at all hours, creating a public nuisance." "The only nuisance here is you," Jed said quietly. Hanley's eyes narrowed. "Careful. Carter, I'd hate to have to look into your background. Man living alone, keeping to himself. Makes folks wonder what he's hiding." "Wonder all you like." "Oh, I intend to." Hanley stood, adjusting his gun belt. "In fact, I've already sent some inquiries. Amazing what you can learn with a few telegrams to the right people." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jed felt the old familiar coldness creeping up his spine, the readiness for violence that he'd worked so hard to bury. "Get out," Maribel said, her voice steady despite the fear Jed could see in her eyes. "You've got no cause to harass my customers." "Not yet," Hanley agreed. "But I'm patient. Sooner or later, you'll slip up. And when you do," he tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Miss O'Hara. Carter." After they left, Maribel sank onto a stool, suddenly looking exhausted. "He's not going to stop. He's wanted this place since Patrick died, wanted other things too." Now he's got an excuse to come after both of us. Let him come. You don't understand. She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. He's got connections, influence. He could destroy you just for associating with me. You should stop coming here. No. Jed, please. I'm not worth... You are. The words came out fiercer than he intended. You're worth 10 of him. 100 of those gossips. Don't let them make you believe otherwise. She laughed, a broken sound. You really don't care what people think, do you? I care what you think. The rest can go hang. That startled her into silence. They stared at each other across the empty restaurant. Afternoon light slanting through dusty windows, illuminating motes that danced between them like possibilities. There's something else, Maribel said finally. Something I haven't told you about why Hanley wants this place so badly. Jed waited. There's a railroad survey team coming through next year. The proposed route runs right through this part of town. If the railroad comes, this property will be worth 20 times what it is now. And Hanley knows this. He's been buying up lots all along the proposed route, using intimidation when money won't work. I'm one of the last holdouts. She stood, pacing to the window. He tried to court me at first, after Patrick died. When that didn't work, he tried threats. Now he's using the town's prejudice against me as a weapon. All the more reason not to give in. All the more reason you should stay away. He'll destroy you to get to me. Jed moved to stand beside her at the window. Outside, Redemption Creek went about its business. Cowboys heading for the saloons, merchants closing shops, decent folks carefully avoiding looking at Maribel's restaurant. I need to tell you something, he said, about who I was before. She turned to face him, waiting. I was cavalry, captain in the 7th. After the war, we were sent west to keep the peace. He tasted bitterness in the words. What we mostly kept was blood on our hands. Indian wars. They called them massacres, would be more honest. Maribel remained silent, but her hand found his, squeezing gently. There was a village, winter camp, mostly women and children. Orders were to clear them out, make way for settlers. His voice went flat, mechanical. I refused. My commanding officer didn't. When it was over, I shot him, put a bullet in Colonel Marcus Thornton right in front of his tent. My God! They called it temporary insanity, mustered me out quiet-like to avoid a scandal. Thornton lived, but I'd made enemies, powerful ones. That's what Hanley will find if he digs deep enough. That Captain Jedediah Carter is a coward who shot his commanding officer rather than follow orders. That's not cowardice, Maribel said fiercely. That's conscience. Tell that to the families of the men who served with me. Tell that to the army that branded me unfit for service. He pulled his hand away. So, you see, I'm no knight in shining armor, just a broken soldier hiding from his past. We're a pair, aren't we? Maribel said softly. The widow who killed her husband and the soldier who shot his commander. No wonder the town's in an uproar. Despite everything, Jed found himself almost smiling. When you put it that way, it does sound like one of those dime novels. Except in those, the hero always wins and the woman's virtue remains unquestioned. Never did care much for fiction. The dinner crowd would arrive soon. What was left of it? Already. Jed could see some of the regulars hesitating outside, peering through windows before deciding whether association with Maribel was worth the risk to their own reputations. I should go, he said. Yes, she agreed, but neither moved. I'll be back next week. You shouldn't. I'll be back anyway. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a gesture so unexpected that Jed froze. Stubborn man, she whispered. Pot calling the kettle black. As he rode out of town, Jed could feel eyes on him from windows and doorways. The rumors would fly thick now, growing in the telling. By week's end, who knew what stories would be circulating? But he thought of Maribel standing alone in her restaurant, facing down prejudice and greed with nothing but a skillet and sheer will, and knew he'd ride back into that hostility every week if it meant she didn't have to face it alone. The past had finally caught up with him, just as he'd always known it would. But maybe, just maybe, two broken people could build something stronger than what they'd been separately, even if the whole town stood against them. The first snow of winter dusted Redemption Creek like flour on a baker's board, softening the hard edges of the buildings but doing nothing to warm the cold reception that greeted Jed and Maribel wherever they went. 3 months had passed since that afternoon in her restaurant. 3 months of stubborn defiance against the town's attempts to drive them apart. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Jed had convinced Maribel to close the restaurant early and accompany him to the autumn harvest dance at the Grange Hall. It was perhaps foolish, certainly provocative, but he was tired of sneaking around like they had something to be ashamed of. "This is a mistake," Maribel murmured as they stood outside the hall, music and laughter spilling through the windows into the cold night air. "Probably," Jed agreed, offering her his arm. "Shall we?" She looked up at him, wearing the green dress he'd bought her from the traveling merchant, a small scandal in itself when word got out. Her hair was pinned up in elaborate coils, exposing the graceful line of her neck. She'd never looked more beautiful or more vulnerable. "Together?" she asked. Together. The music stopped the moment they entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every face in the crowded hall turned toward them with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to poorly concealed fascination. Jed felt Maribel's fingers tighten on his arm, but she kept her chin high, meeting the stares with a defiant smile. They made their way to the refreshment table through a gauntlet of whispers and turned backs. "Well," said a familiar voice, "this should be interesting." Doc Whitman, the town physician and one of the few people who still treated Maribel with courtesy, raised his glass to them. His wife, Sarah, stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral. "Doc," Jed nodded. "Mrs. Whitman." "Brave of you both to come," Sarah said quietly, "though I'm not sure brave is the word others will use." The fiddler, after an awkward pause, struck up another tune. A few couples tentatively returned to dancing, though most continued to cluster in groups, shooting dark looks their way. "Would you like to dance?" Jed asked Maribel. "You're determined to cause a complete scandal, aren't you?" "We're already a scandal. Might as well enjoy the music." He led her onto the floor, acutely aware of the space that opened around them as other couples moved away. Maribel was stiff in his arms at first, but as they moved together, she gradually relaxed. "When did you learn to dance?" she asked, surprised by his competence. Officers were expected to be gentlemen, even those of us more comfortable in a saddle than a ballroom. "Full of surprises, aren't you?" "I try." They completed one dance, then another, gradually. A few other couples joined them on the floor, though whether from tolerance or simply the desire to dance, Jed couldn't tell. It was during the third dance that Sheriff Hanley made his entrance. He strode in like he owned the place, which in many ways he did. His badge gleamed in the lantern light, and his hand rested casually on his gun butt. The two hard cases who served as his unofficial deputies flanked him. "Evening, folks," Hanley announced, his voice cutting through the music. "Hate to interrupt the festivities, but I've received some disturbing news that needs addressing." The fiddler's bow screeched to a halt. All eyes turned to the sheriff. "What news?" asked Mayor Douglas, a weak-chinned man who owed his position to Hanley's influence. "Seems we've been harboring a fugitive." Hanley's cold eyes found Jed. "Captain Jedediah Carter, late of the 7th Cavalry. Wanted for questioning in the attempted murder of his commanding officer." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maribel's hand found Jed's, gripping tight. "That was investigated and closed," Jed said evenly. 5 years ago." "Was it?" Hanley produced a telegram from his vest pocket. "According to this, Colonel Thornton has recently filed new charges, claims you threatened him, Shot him in cold blood. Says there are witnesses now willing to come forward. Convenient, these witnesses appearing now. Law's the law. Carter, I'll need you to come with me until we can sort this out. No. Maribel stepped forward. This is harassment? Nothing more. You're using his past to... Ma'am. Hanley cut her off. I'd be careful about defending fugitives. Makes folks wonder about your own judgment, more than they already do. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for drama. Jed could feel the mood shifting, ugly undercurrents swirling beneath the surface of civilized behavior. I'll come willingly, Jed said, not wanting violence to erupt with Maribel in the middle of it. But this won't stand. Hanley, false charges don't become true just because you want them to. We'll let the territorial judge decide that. Could take weeks for him to arrive. Of course. Months, even. Hanley's smile was predatory. Hope you like our jail. As the deputies moved to flank him, Maribel pressed something into Jed's hand, a small derringer from her purse. Just in case, she whispered. But it was what she did next that truly set the town on its ear. She kissed him. Not a chaste peck on the cheek, but a full, passionate kiss that left no doubt about their relationship. The crowd recoiled as if slapped. I'll get you out, she promised against his lips. Whatever it takes. Touching, Hanley sneered. The murderer and his harlot. What a pair you make. Jed's fist connected with Hanley's jaw before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. The sheriff stumbled back, blood streaming from his nose. That's assaulting an officer. Hanley spit blood. Now I don't need questionable telegrams to hold you. The deputies grabbed Jed's arms, and he didn't resist. Around them, the good people of Redemption Creek buzzed with shocked excitement. This would fuel gossip for months. This isn't over, Maribel called as they dragged Jed away. Oh, but it is, Hanley replied, dabbing at his nose with a handkerchief. Your protector's gone. Miss O'Hara, time you reconsidered my offer on your property. Unless you'd prefer to join him in a cell, I'm sure I could find charges. Conspiracy, aiding a fugitive, public indecency. Go to hell. Ladies first. The jail was everything Jed expected, a cramped stone building with 2 cells, one occupied by a snoring drunk. They shoved him into the empty cell, and Hanley personally turned the key. Comfortable? The sheriff asked. Better get used to it, even if those charges don't stick. Assaulting an officer in front of witnesses, that's 6 months minimum. Worth it. Hanley touched his swelling nose gingerly. We'll see if you feel that way after a few weeks. No visitors. By the way, especially not her. After they left, Jed settled onto the narrow bunk. Fingering the derringer Maribel had slipped him. 2 shots, easily concealed. She'd known something like this might happen, had come prepared. The woman continued to surprise him. Hours passed. The drunk in the next cell woke, vomited, and went back to sleep. Through the barred window, Jed could see snow beginning to fall in earnest, blanketing the town in deceptive purity. Near midnight, he heard footsteps. Doc Whitman appeared, medical bag in hand, the night deputy trailing behind. Sheriff said the prisoner needed medical attention, Doc said. That nose looked broken. That was the sheriff's nose, Doc, the deputy said uncertainly. Was it? My eyes aren't what they used to be. Open the cell. Son, can't examine him through bars. The deputy complied reluctantly. Doc entered, setting his bag on the bunk and blocking the deputy's view with his body. Let me see those hands, Doc said loudly, then dropped his voice to a whisper. Miss O'Hara sent me. Says to be ready. Tomorrow night. He made a show of examining Jed's knuckles, wrapping them unnecessarily. Under the bandages, he tucked a small file. She also said to tell you, the fire's not out yet, whatever that means. Despite everything, Jed almost smiled. Tell her to be careful. Hanley's desperate. Aren't we all? Doc closed his bag. There. Those hands should heal nicely. Try not to punch any more sheriffs. After he left, Jed lay back on the bunk, feeling the file's weight against his palm. Tomorrow night, whatever Maribel was planning, he hoped she wouldn't take unnecessary risks. Hanley had shown he was willing to abuse his position to get what he wanted. But then, Jed reflected, Hanley had never dealt with someone like Maribel O'Hara. The wildest cook in town had faced down worse than a corrupt sheriff. And now she had something to fight for beyond just her restaurant. The snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the town. Somewhere out there, a red-haired woman was planning a jailbreak. Jed closed his eyes, conserving his strength for whatever came next. The dance had indeed caused a scandal, but sometimes, he thought, scandals were just another word for change, and Redemption Creek was long overdue for both. Through the window, he could see the faint glow from Maribel's restaurant, still lit despite the late hour. A beacon in the darkness, stubborn and defiant, just like the woman herself. The fire started at midnight. Jed smelled smoke first, acrid and sharp, cutting through the cold air of the jail cell. Through the barred window, he could see an orange glow painting the snow-covered streets. His heart seized as he recognized the direction Maribel's restaurant. "Fire!" he shouted, rattling the cell door. "Deputy, there's a fire!" The night deputy, a young man named Tommy Brennan, stumbled from the front office, still half asleep. "What are you hollering about?" "Look outside, the town's burning." Brennan peered through the window and cursed. The glow was spreading, and now they could hear the fire bell clanging frantically. "Sweet Jesus, half the block's going up." Let me out," Jed said urgently. "You need every hand to fight this." "Can't do that. Sheriff would have my hide." "The sheriff would rather have a town left standing. Use your head." "Boy." Brennan wavered. Then another explosion of flames lit up the night. With shaking hands, he unlocked the cell. "You run, and I'll hunt you down myself." Jed was already moving. "I'm not running." They burst onto the street to find chaos. The fire had started at Henderson's Mercantile, 3 buildings down from Maribel's restaurant, and was spreading fast in both directions. The volunteer fire brigade was already forming a bucket line from the water tower, but the flames laughed at their efforts. Jed spotted Maribel immediately. She was directing men to wet down her restaurant's walls, her hair wild around her face, soot already streaking her dress. When she saw him, relief flashed across her features before she turned back to the task at hand. "The wind's pushing it this way," she called. "We need to clear everything flammable from the alley." They worked side by side, throwing buckets of water, hauling away wooden crates and barrels that could fuel the fire's spread. The heat was incredible, like standing too close to a forge. Jed's lungs burned with each breath. Sheriff Hanley appeared through the smoke. His face twisted with rage when he saw Jed. "What the hell is he doing out?" "I released him to help fight the fire," Brennan said, trying to sound authoritative. "You did what?" "Sheriff," Mayor Douglas interrupted, breathing hard from manning the bucket line. "We need every able-bodied man. Deal with it later." For 2 hours they fought the flames. When the bucket brigade proved insufficient, they turned to demolition, pulling down a feed store to create a firebreak. Jed worked alongside men who'd shunned him the day before, united in the common purpose of saving their town. It was Maribel who spotted the real danger. "The restaurant!" she cried. "Someone's inside." Through the smoke-stained windows, a figure moved, without thinking. Jed plunged toward the building. The front door was locked strange, given the circumstances, so he kicked it in. Smoke billowed out, and heat hit him like a physical blow. Inside, he found Deputy Garrett splashing kerosene on the walls. "What are you doing?" Jed grabbed Garrett's arm, sending the can flying. "Sheriff's orders." Garrett coughed through the smoke. "Make sure her place burns. Look like an accident." You're destroying half the town for Hanley's greed. Weren't supposed to spread this far. Wind changed. Garrett's eyes were wild with panic. Weren't supposed to. A beam crashed down, showering them with burning embers. Jed hauled Garrett toward the door, but the man twisted away. Can't let you tell. Sheriff would... He reached for his gun. Jed was faster. The Derringer Maribel had given him barked twice in the confined space. Garrett fell, clutching his shoulder, his gun spinning away across the floor. You shot me, he gasped. You'll live. Jed dragged him outside, where the bucket brigade immediately doused them both with water. Maribel appeared at his side. Are you hurt? No, but Garrett here has something to say. Jed hauled the deputy to his feet. Don't you? Faced with the crowd of soot-stained townspeople, Garrett broke. Sheriff ordered it. The fire. Said to make sure the O'Hara place burned. Make it look accidental. Only supposed to be her building, I swear. The crowd's murmur turned ugly. Half their businesses were in ashes because of Hanley's scheme. Where is the sheriff? Mayor Douglas demanded. They found him at his office, hastily packing saddlebags with what looked suspiciously like the town treasury. He saw the mob coming and reached for his rifle, but Doc Whitman stepped from the shadows and clubbed him with a bottle of chloroform. Always wanted to do that, Doc said mildly as Hanley crumpled. By dawn, the fire was under control. 7 buildings had burned completely. 3 more were badly damaged, but they'd saved the rest of the block, including Maribel's restaurant, though it reeked of smoke and had scorch marks on one wall. Hanley sat in his own jail cell, sporting a spectacular black eye, courtesy of one of the merchants whose shop had burned. Garrett occupied the other cell, his shoulder bandaged by Doc Whitman. The territorial marshal had been summoned, and until he arrived, Mayor Douglas had appointed Jed as temporary sheriff, an irony not lost on anyone. Jed found Maribel sitting on the steps of her restaurant, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Her green dress was ruined. Her hands were blistered from handling hot buckets, and she'd never looked more beautiful to him. So, he said, settling beside her, was this your jailbreak plan? She laughed, a tired sound. Actually, no, I was going to drug Brennan's coffee and steal his keys. Much less dramatic. She leaned against his shoulder. Though I suppose burning down half the town is one way to expose corruption. Your restaurant survived. Barely. It'll take weeks to get the smoke smell out. She was quiet for a moment. Garrett confessed everything, not just about the fire, but about Hanley's schemes. The railroad speculation, the intimidation, all of it. Good. They dropped the charges against you. By the way, turns out that telegram from Colonel Thornton was forged. Hanley paid a telegraph operator in Denver to send it. I figured as much. They sat in silence, watching the sun rise over the damaged town. People were already beginning to clean up, salvaging what they could, helping neighbors whose losses were worse. It was what frontier towns did. They endured. They rebuilt. They went on. What happens now? Maribel asked. I suppose that depends. On what? On whether you still make pot roast on Wednesdays. She turned to look at him, and despite the soot and exhaustion, her smile was radiant. Jed Carter, are you courting me? Attempting to, though I should warn you, my reputation's a bit scorched at the moment. Scorched, she groaned at the pun. That's terrible. I have my moments. Mrs. Hutchins approached, her usual disapproving expression replaced by something almost like humility. Her boarding house had been saved thanks to their efforts. Miss O'Hara, she said stiffly. Mr. Carter, the ladies' auxiliary would like to help with the restaurant repairs, as thanks for what you did last night. Maribel blinked in surprise. That's very kind. Mrs. Hutchins. Yes, well, the older woman fidgeted with her shawl. Perhaps we've been hasty in our judgments. Good day. She hurried off before either could respond. "Did that just happen?" Maribel asked. "I believe it did. The respectable ladies of Redemption Creek want to help the scandalous widow. Apparently, saving their businesses earns you a second chance at respectability." "And what about you?" She took his hand, studying the blisters and burns. "You could leave now. No one would blame you. You've done more than enough." Jed thought about his quiet ranch, the solitude he'd cultivated so carefully. Then he looked at the woman beside him, fierce, stubborn, brave beyond measure. A woman who'd slip a derringer to a man heading to jail, who'd fight fires and corruption with equal determination. "I've been running for 5 years," he said. "Hiding from the past, from myself, from any chance at a future. Then this red-headed force of nature crashed into my life with her skillets and her secrets." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm done running. Maribel, if you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" She laughed, but her eyes were bright with tears. "Jed Carter, you impossible man. I've been yours since the day you stood between me and those cowboys. I was just waiting for you to figure it out." He kissed her then, there on the steps of her smoke-damaged restaurant, in full view of whoever cared to look. It tasted of soot and possibility, of new beginnings rising from ashes. Someone cleared their throat. They broke apart to find young Tommy Brennan standing awkwardly nearby, a badge in his outstretched hand. "Mayor says to give you this. Mr. Carter says the town needs a real sheriff, not just a temporary one, if you're interested." Jed stared at the badge. "I shot my commanding officer. That's not exactly lawman material." "You shot a man who was ordering a massacre," Doc Whitman said, approaching with his medical bag. "And last night you stopped our own sheriff from burning down the town. I'd say that makes you exactly what we need." "Take it," Maribel urged. "The town needs someone honest, someone who understands that the law should protect people, not prey on them." Jed took the badge, its weight both familiar and strange in his palm. "All right, but I'll need deputies I can trust." "I volunteer," Brennan said eagerly. "I know I made mistakes, but you let me out when it counted. That's a start." As the sun climbed higher, warming the winter air, people began arriving with tools and lumber. The rebuilding would start immediately. That was the frontier way. And at the center of it all, a former soldier turned sheriff and a wild-hearted cook stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The fire had burned away more than buildings. It had burned away pretense and prejudice, leaving room for something new to grow. And in the ashes of the old Redemption Creek, a different town was taking shape, one built on courage, honesty, and the unlikely love between two people who'd found home in each other. "So, Sheriff Carter," Maribel said with a grin, "does this mean you'll be in town more than just Wednesdays?" "Appears so. Think you can handle seeing me every day?" "I'll manage somehow." She stood, dusting off her ruined dress. "Now come on. We've got a restaurant to rebuild and a town to feed. Those folks will be hungry after all this heroics." And despite everything, the exhaustion, the destruction, the challenges ahead, Jed found himself smiling as he followed her inside. The wildest cook in town had tamed him at last, and he couldn't be happier about it. Spring came to Redemption Creek like a hesitant visitor, melting the snow in fits and starts, revealing the scars left by the winter fire. The rebuilding was nearly complete, with fresh lumber and new paint covering the damage. But some wounds ran deeper than others. And on this particular evening, Jed could see one of them etched across Maribel's face. He found her in the restaurant after closing time, sitting alone at a table with an unopened letter before her. The lamplight cast shadows under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope. "What is it?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "It's from back east, Boston." She turned the letter over, studying the precise handwriting. "I recognize the seal. It's from Patrick's family." In the months since the fire, since Jed had taken up the sheriff's badge, They'd settled into a comfortable routine. He kept the peace. She fed the town. They spent evenings together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in each other's company. But the past had a way of reaching out when you least expected it. "You don't have to open it," Jed said gently. "No, I do." She broke the seal with decisive movements. "Running from things doesn't make them go away. You taught me that." As she read, her face went through a series of transformations: surprise, pain, and finally, a deep sadness that made Jed want to reach across the table and pull her into his arms. "Patrick's mother is dead," she said quietly. "His brother writes that she passed last winter. He also writes—" She had to stop, take a breath. "He says they know about what happened to Patrick, about how he died, and they forgive me." "That's good, isn't it?" "There's more." She set the letter down with shaking hands. "They want to know about their grandchild, about Margaret." The name hung in the air between them, in all their conversations, through all their growing closeness. Maribel had mentioned her daughter only once, the child she'd lost, the grief that had hardened her heart against the possibility of family. "I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The whole truth, about Margaret, about why I'm so afraid." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. If we're going to have any chance at a future, you need to know it all." She rose and moved to the window, staring out at the darkened street. When she spoke, her voice was steady but distant, as if recounting someone else's story. "Margaret was born 2 years after Patrick and I came west. Perfect. She was 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and eyes green as spring grass. Patrick was so proud. For a little while, we were actually happy." Jed remained silent, letting her find her own pace. "She was 15 months old when the fever came. Scarlet fever. Doc Whitman said half the children in town took sick that summer. Margaret," her voice broke. "She was so small, so hot. I sat with her for 3 days and nights, trying everything: cool baths, willow bark tea, prayers I hadn't said since childhood. Nothing worked." She pressed her palm against the window glass, seeking its coolness. "Patrick was drunk when she died. Had been for days. Couldn't bear to watch her suffer. I was alone when she left, holding her, singing the lullabies my mother taught me. She just slipped away, quiet as a sigh." "Maribel." "I buried her myself. Patrick was too drunk, and we had no money for a proper funeral. Found a spot under a cottonwood tree outside town, where wildflowers grow in spring. I visit sometimes, tell her about my day, leave flowers when I can find them." She turned from the window, tears streaming down her face. "After that, Patrick's drinking got worse, the gambling started, and I turned hard inside, decided love was too dangerous, family too fragile. Better to be alone than risk that kind of pain again." Jed stood slowly, crossed to her. "But you weren't alone. Not really." "No," she agreed, accepting his embrace. "You stubborn, impossible man. You wouldn't let me be alone." They stood together in the lamplight, her tears soaking his shirt, his arms anchoring her to the present. Outside, a dog barked, and somewhere a piano played a melancholy tune. "Tell me about your ghosts," she said eventually, pulling back to look at him. "Fair's fair. I've shown you mine." Jed guided her back to the table, poured them both coffee from the pot, keeping warm on the stove. The story he'd kept buried for so long seemed to demand telling now, in this moment of shared vulnerability. "Winter of 68 inches, he began. We'd been chasing a band of Cheyenne for weeks. They were just trying to find somewhere safe to winter, somewhere the army wouldn't follow, but orders were orders." He stared into his coffee, seeing another time, another place. "We caught up to them at Sand Creek. It was dawn, bitter cold. I could see the camp through my field glasses, mostly women and children. A few old men. Warriors were out hunting. We knew that. Colonel Thornton knew that. His voice went flat, mechanical. He gave the order to attack, said we needed to teach them a lesson, make them fear us. I refused. Told him it would be murder, not war. He said I was a coward, that I'd be court-martialed. So you shot him? So I shot him. Jed's laugh was bitter. Not to kill, just to stop him. Put a bullet in his shoulder, knocked him off his horse. But the damage was done. The attack was called off. But I'd broken the cardinal rule. I'd turned on my own. You saved those people. Did I? The army just sent another unit the next week. Found the camp empty. Thank God. But how many other camps weren't so lucky? How many did I fail to save because I was cashiered out, branded unfit? Maribel reached across the table, took his hands in hers. You can't save everyone, Jed, but you saved who you could. That matters. Like you matter, he said softly. You and this town and the life we're building, it all matters. She squeezed his hands. Patrick's family wants to know if there are any photographs of Margaret, any remembrances. I have one, a tintype taken when she was 6 months old. Haven't looked at it since. Would you like me to be there when you do? Please. They went upstairs to her small apartment above the restaurant. From a trunk at the foot of her bed, she retrieved a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in faded silk, was a single tintype. A baby's face stared out at them, solemn as all children were in photographs then, but with unmistakably bright eyes. She had your smile, Jed said softly. When she wasn't posing for the camera, I bet she had your smile. Maribel traced the image with one finger. She did. And Patrick's laugh, before the drink took it away. She was quiet for a moment. I'll write to them. Tell them about her. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from the grief. Grief's like a broken bone. Jed offered. Hurts worse if you don't set it proper. Let it heal right. When did you become so wise? Somewhere between that first plate you threw and now. That startled a watery laugh from her. I should warn you, I still have a temper. I'm counting on it. She carefully rewrapped the tintype, but instead of returning it to the trunk, she placed it on the small table by her bed. A reclaiming of memory, a step toward healing. Jed, she said quietly. What are we doing, really? What do you mean? This, she gestured between them. You and me, the sheriff and the scandalous widow. Where does it lead? He considered the question seriously. Where do you want it to lead? That's not an answer. No, but it's the right question. He moved closer, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I know what I want. A life with you, however that looks. But you've lost so much, been hurt so badly. I won't push for more than you're ready to give. And if I'm never ready, if I can't risk that kind of loss again, then I'll take whatever you can offer and be grateful for it. She studied his face, searching for truth. You'd accept that a half-life, always holding back. I'd accept you, however you come to me. But Maribel, he cupped her face gently. You're the strongest woman I know. Don't sell yourself short. You've already risked everything by letting me this close. Damn you, she whispered. Why do you have to be right? Sheriff's prerogative. She kissed him then. Different from their previous kisses. This one held promise, possibility, a future being chosen rather than feared. When they broke apart, both were breathless. Stay, she said simply. Maribel. Not that, just stay. Hold me. I don't want to be alone with the ghosts tonight. So he stayed, fully clothed on top of the covers, holding her as she held the memory of her daughter. They talked through the night about Margaret, about the Cheyenne camp, about dreams deferred and hopes nearly lost. As dawn broke, painting the room in soft gold, they were still awake, still talking, but the ghosts seemed quieter somehow. I'll write to Patrick's family today, Maribel decided. Tell them about their granddaughter. Maybe even send the tintype, if I can bear to part with it. That's generous. It's necessary. They lost a son and a granddaughter. The least I can do is give them some piece of her to hold on to. And us, Jed asked carefully. What piece do we hold on to? She was quiet for a long moment. Maybe we make new pieces. Build something that's just ours, not haunted by what came before. I'd like that. It won't be easy. I'm still broken in places. So am I. Maybe that's why we fit. As the town began to wake around them, they made quiet plans. Nothing grand, nothing rushed, just two damaged people choosing to heal together, one careful day at a time. The ghosts would always be there, Margaret, in her cottonwood grove, the Cheyenne camp in Jed's nightmares. But perhaps, together, they could build something stronger than the pain. Maribel rose to start the day's baking, but paused at the doorway. Jed, thank you for listening, for staying, for everything. Thank you for trusting me with it. She smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached all the way to her eyes. Sheriff Carter, I do believe you're growing on me. Like a fungus. Like a particularly stubborn weed that refuses to be uprooted. I'll take it. As she headed downstairs to start the ovens, Jed remained for a moment, watching the sun climb higher over Redemption Creek. The town was waking up, starting another day of small dramas and ordinary miracles. And somewhere in the middle of it all, two people were carefully, courageously, choosing to live again. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better it was a beginning. The sun hung directly overhead, a merciless eye watching the drama about to unfold in Redemption Creek's main street. Word had spread like wildfire through the town Walt Hanley was back. 3 months in territorial prison had changed the former sheriff. Gone was the soft belly and swagger. In their place stood a leaner, harder man with eyes like chips of flint. He'd ridden in that morning with 2 companions, hard cases from the prison who'd served time for rustling and worse. Jed stood in front of the sheriff's office, badge glinting in the harsh noon light. Deputy Brennan flanked him on one side, trying to hide his nervousness. On the other stood Sam Morrison, a former cavalry sergeant Jed had deputized after the fire. The street had emptied of civilians, though faces peered from windows and doorways. Hanley, Jed called out as the 3 men dismounted at the far end of the street. You're not welcome here. Hanley's laugh was like grinding stone. Not welcome. This is my town. Carter built it up from nothing, kept order when it was just tents and dreams. You think a few months changes that? The law changes that. You're a convicted criminal now. Move on. The law. Hanley spat in the dust. You want to talk about law? Let's talk about how an army deserter wearing a stolen badge is playing sheriff. Let's talk about justice. From the corner of his eye, Jed saw Maribel emerge from her restaurant, the Winchester rifle he'd taught her to use cradled in her arms. Other townspeople were appearing too, Doc Whitman, Mayor Douglas, even Mrs. Hutchins. They formed a loose line behind Jed and his deputies. This isn't just about you and me anymore. Hanley, Jed said. These people have chosen their side. Have they now? Hanley's hand hovered near his gun. Even when they know what you really are, a coward who shot his commanding officer, a man who chose savages over his own kind. I chose conscience over orders. Jed replied evenly. Just like this town chose honesty over your corruption. Pretty words. Hanley took a step forward, his companions spreading out slightly. But words won't stop bullets. You ready for that? Carter ready to kill again, or will you run like you did from the cavalry? The tension stretched taut as piano wire. Jed could feel the weight of eyes on him, not just Hanley's, but the whole town's. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. I'm not running, Jed said quietly. Not anymore. You've got 10 seconds to get on your horse and ride out. After that, we settle this permanent. Hanley's face twisted into something ugly. You always were too noble for your own good. That's why. He went for his gun mid-sentence, a trick Jed had been expecting. Time seemed to slow as Jed's hand moved to his Colt, muscle memory from 100 fights taking over. The gun seemed to leap into his hand, the motion smooth as flowing water. 3 shots cracked almost simultaneously. Hanley's shot went wide, shattering a window behind Jed. One of Hanley's companions spun and fell, clutching his shoulders Sam Morrison's work. The 3rd shot was Jed's. Hanley stood frozen for a moment, looking down at the spreading red stain on his vest. His gun slipped from nerveless fingers. "Damn," he wheezed, sinking to his knees. "Should have killed you that first day." He pitched forward into the dust and didn't move again. The surviving companion threw down his weapon, hands high. "I'm done, I surrender." As Brennan moved to secure the prisoner, Jed holstered his weapon with hands that barely trembled. The street erupted in noise as people emerged fully from their hiding places, voices raised in excitement and relief. But Jed's focus was entirely on Maribel as she set down the rifle and walked toward him. Her face was pale but determined, and when she reached him, she placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. "You all right?" she asked softly. "I didn't want to kill him." "I know, but he didn't give you a choice." She looked down at Hanley's still form. "It's over now. Really over." Mayor Douglas approached, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Sheriff Carter, that is, the town owes you. What I mean to say is—" "What His Honor is trying to say," Doc Whitman interjected dryly, "is that you've more than proven yourself. Any man who'd stand in the street facing down 3 killers for this town has earned our respect and gratitude." "Here, here," someone called out, and suddenly the crowd was pressing closer, offering handshakes and back slaps, even misses. Hutchins patted his arm, declaring him a proper lawman, despite everything. Through it all, Maribel stayed by his side, a quiet presence anchoring him as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what had happened set in. Another man, dead by his hand. Another ghost to carry, but this time, he wasn't carrying it alone. Later, after Hanley's body had been removed and statements taken, after the prisoner was locked up and the town had settled into an exhausted quiet, Jed found himself sitting in Maribel's kitchen. She moved around him, preparing the evening meal with practiced efficiency, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Say it," he said finally. She paused in her chopping. "Say what?" "Whatever's eating at you." She set down the knife, turned to face him. "I was terrified," she admitted. "When I saw him ride in, when I realized what was coming, all I could think was that I was going to lose you, that I'd finally let myself care again and it was all going to be ripped away. But it wasn't. No, but it could have been. That's the life we're choosing. Isn't it you wear that badge? Face down men like Hanley, and I wait and worry and pray you come home each night." Jed rose, crossed to her. "If you want me to turn in the badge—" "Don't you dare," her eyes flashed. "This town needs you. I need you. But I need you alive. Jed Carter, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." She hit him with a dish towel. "Don't yes ma'am me. I'm serious." "I know." He caught her hands, stilled them. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen. This is a dangerous job in a dangerous time. But I can promise to be careful, to not take unnecessary risks. And I can promise that I'll always do everything in my power to come home to you." "Home to me," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." He took a breath. "In fact, I've been thinking, my ranch is too far out for a sheriff to live. I need to be closer to town. And you shouldn't be living alone above the restaurant. It's not proper." "Jed Carter, are you making improper suggestions?" "On the contrary, I'm making a very proper one." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Maribel O'Hara, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She stared down at him, eyes wide, You're serious. Never been more serious in my life. We've known each other less than a year. And I've loved you for most of it. I'm difficult, stubborn. I throw plates when I'm angry. I'm moody, haunted by my past. And I just killed a man in the middle of Main Street. We're quite a pair. The gossips will have a field day. The sheriff marrying the scandalous widow. Let them gossip. They'll do it anyway. She was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks, even as she smiled. You impossible man. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. God help us both. He stood, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her soundly. She tasted of tears and joy, of new beginnings and hard-won happiness. When they broke apart, both were breathless. When? She asked. Tomorrow, if you're willing. I don't want to wait any longer. Tomorrow, Jed. I don't have a dress. We haven't arranged anything. I don't care about any of that. I just want you to be my wife. We can have a party later if you want. But right now, I just need to know you're mine and I'm yours. Legal and binding. She studied his face, saw something there that made her nod. All right, tomorrow, but I'm at least going to wash my hair. Deal. The next day dawned clear and bright, unusual for the season. By 10 in the morning, what seemed like the entire town had gathered at the small church. News of the impromptu wedding had spread overnight, and even those who'd previously shunned Maribel came to witness the union of their sheriff and the wildest cook in town. Maribel wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that young Tommy Brennan had picked that morning. Jed wore his cleanest shirt and had even submitted to a shave from the barber. Doc Whitman stood as his best man, while Sarah Whitman attended Maribel. Reverend Phillips, who'd initially balked at performing the ceremony for a woman of questionable reputation, had been persuaded by a combination of Mrs. Hutchins's surprisingly fierce advocacy and the reminder that Jed was the one standing between the town and lawlessness. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying over the packed church. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Jedediah Carter and Maribel O'Hara, two souls who have found each other in the wilderness of life. Jed barely heard the words. His entire focus was on Maribel, the way the light caught in her hair, the slight tremble in her hands, the joy and determination mingled in her expression. This woman who'd faced down mobs with a skillet, who'd rebuilt after devastating loss, who'd chosen to love again despite the risk. Do you, Jedediah, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do. The words came out stronger than he'd expected, ringing with certainty. Do you, Maribel, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do. Her voice was clear and unwavering. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before witnesses. The church erupted in applause, and someone, probably Doc Whitman, let out a whoop that would have been more appropriate in a saloon than a sanctuary. As they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, Jed caught snippets of conversation. Never thought I'd see the day. Good for them, I say. Everyone deserves happiness. That Maribel's done wonders for him, and he for her. Outside the church, the town had set up tables laden with food contributions from everyone, a community celebration of new beginnings. Even the weather cooperated, providing a gentle breeze that kept the dust down. How does it feel, Mrs. Carter? Jed asked as they took their place at the head table. Strange, she admitted. Good strange, like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. I know the feeling. As the afternoon wore on, filled with food and music and more goodwill than either had experienced in years, Jed reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that dusty confrontation in a restaurant to this moment of community and celebration, they'd both been broken, both been running from pain too deep for words. But somehow, together, they'd found a way to build something new. The sun was setting by the time the celebration wound down. As Jed and Maribel prepared to leave for the small house they'd rented at the edge of town, close enough for Jed to respond to emergencies, but private enough for a newly married couple, the townspeople gathered to see them off. "Sheriff," Mayor Douglas called out, "I believe I speak for everyone when I say we're proud to have you both as part of our community. May your union be blessed with many years of happiness." "Hear, hear," the crowd echoed. As they walked hand in hand toward their new home, Maribel leaned into Jed's shoulder. "Think they'll still call me the wildest cook in town?" "Probably, but now you'll be the wildest cook who tamed the sheriff." "I prefer to think of it as a mutual taming." "Fair enough." They paused at the threshold of their new home, and Jed swept her up into his arms, carrying her across in the tradition as old as marriage itself. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter," he said, setting her down gently in their parlor. "Welcome home, Sheriff," she replied, pulling him down for a kiss that promised all the nights to come. Outside, Redemption Creek settled into evening, peaceful for once. The sheriff and his bride were home. The town was safe, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. But for tonight, all was well in their corner of the frontier, where two broken souls had found wholeness in each other and a town had learned that redemption came in many forms. 5 years had passed since that spring wedding, and the sunset painted Redemption Creek in shades of gold and copper. Jed Carter stood on the porch of what had once been just a small house, but had grown into a proper home, complete with a whitewashed fence and Maribel's vegetable garden stretching out back. The sound of laughter drew his attention to the yard, where a small figure with red gold curls was chasing chickens with determined concentration. 4-year-old Annie Carter had her mother's fiery hair and her father's steady gaze, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. "Annie Rose, leave those poor chickens be," Maribel called from the kitchen window. "Supper's almost ready." "But, Mama, they won't go in their house." "That's because you're chasing them with a stick, little one," Jed said, stepping down to help. "Here, let me show you." Together, father and daughter gently herded the chickens back to their coop, Annie mimicking Jed's calm movements with serious concentration. It was moments like these that still caught him off guard, the simple domesticity of it all, the life he'd never dared imagine for himself. "Papa, tell me again about when you saved Mama from the bad men," Annie requested as they secured the coop. "That story again?" Jed scooped her up, settling her on his hip. "Don't you ever get tired of it?" "Never. It's romantic, Mrs. Hutchins says so." "Does she now?" Jed chuckled, imagining the town's former chief gossip filling his daughter's head with tales. Time had softened many of the town's harder edges, including Mrs. Hutchins, who now served as Annie's unofficial grandmother. They entered the house to find Maribel putting the finishing touches on dinner. The restaurant still operated, but now under the capable management of Lucy Morrison, Sam's wife. Maribel cooked there 3 days a week, spending the rest of her time maintaining their home and raising Annie. "There are my girls," Jed said, setting Annie in her chair and dropping a kiss on Maribel's cheek. "Your girls are hungry," Maribel replied, but her smile was warm. "Wash up, both of you," as they settled around the table, saying grace over the meal. Jed marveled again at the transformation of their lives. The house was no longer just a shelter, but a home, filled with the accumulated treasures of a shared life. Annie's drawings covered one wall. Maribel's preserves lined the pantry shelves, and photographs, including one of baby Margaret that Patrick's family had sent, held places of honor on the mantel. "Sam Morrison stopped by today," Maribel said as they ate. "Says there's been some trouble up at the mining camps. Claim disputes getting ugly." "I heard," Jed nodded. "I'll ride up tomorrow. See if I can settle things before they escalate. Be careful." Always am. Papa's the best sheriff in the whole territory, Annie declared through a mouthful of cornbread. Don't talk with your mouth full, sweetheart, Maribel corrected gently. But yes, he is. After dinner, they followed their evening routine, Jed helping clear the table while Maribel got Annie ready for bed. Then came story time. All three of them crowded onto Annie's small bed while Jed spun tales of cowboys and adventures, carefully edited for young ears. One more story, Papa, please. You said that 3 stories ago, little miss. Jed laughed. Time for sleep. Will you sing the song, the one about the wildest cook? Jed glanced at Maribel, who rolled her eyes but smiled. It had become something of a family legend. That phrase from the first day they met. Some traveling musician had even written a ditty about it, much to Maribel's eternal embarrassment. In his gentle baritone, Jed sang the silly little song about a cowboy and a cook, about skillets and showdowns and finding love in unexpected places. By the second verse, Annie's eyes were drooping, and by the end, she was fast asleep. They tiptoed out, leaving the door slightly ajar, as Annie preferred, in their own room. Maribel collapsed onto the bed with a contented sigh. Tired? Jed asked, sitting beside her to pull off his boots. The good kind of tired, the kind that comes from a full day and a full heart. He lay back beside her, and they stared at the ceiling in comfortable silence. Through the window, they could hear the sounds of Redemption Creek settling in for the night, a dog barking, piano music from the saloon, the distant whistle of the evening train that now stopped regularly at their once small town. Do you ever miss it? Maribel asked suddenly. The solitude, the simplicity of your ranch before I complicated everything. Jed turned to look at her. Even after 5 years, she could still surprise him with these moments of vulnerability. Never. Not for a single moment. Even when Annie's screaming and the chickens are loose and I'm throwing things? Especially then. He pulled her closer. That ranch was just a hiding place. This you, Annie, our life here, this is home. She nestled against him, and he could feel her smile against his chest. We did all right, didn't we, for 2 broken souls who didn't believe in second chances? Better than all right? A knock at the front door interrupted their quiet moment. Jed sighed, recognizing the urgent rhythm that usually meant sheriff's business. Sheriff Carter, Deputy Brennan's voice called. Sorry to disturb you, but we've got a situation. Jed pulled on his boots and grabbed his gun belt. At the door, he found Brennan looking apologetic but worried. What is it? Tom. Group of riders just came in from the camps. Say there's been a shooting up at the Jupiter claim. Man named Henderson is dead, and they've got his partner locked in a tool shed, talking about hanging him at dawn. Get Sam and meet me at the office. We'll ride out within the hour. As Brennan hurried off, Jed turned to find Maribel watching from the doorway, his coat and rifle already in her hands. I heard, she said simply. You'll need food for the ride. She was already moving toward the kitchen, efficient as always in a crisis. 20 minutes later, Jed stood on the porch again. Saddlebags packed, deputies assembled. Maribel pressed a cloth-wrapped bundle into his hands, extra ammunition. He knew, along with medical supplies. How long, she asked. 2 days, maybe 3 if things get complicated. They always get complicated. She straightened his collar, a wifely gesture that his deputies politely pretended not to notice. Come back safe. Always do. Jed. She caught his arm as he turned to go. Remember, you're not just a sheriff now. You're a husband and a father. Annie and I need you whole. I know. He kissed her, quick but firm. Keep the Winchester handy, just in case. Always do, she echoed with a wry smile, as he rode out with his deputies. Jed looked back once to see Maribel standing on the porch, lamplight spilling around her. She'd stand there until they were out of sight. He knew, just as she'd be standing there when he returned. The ride to the mining camps was hard and fast, But Jed's mind kept drifting back to that warm kitchen, to Annie's laughter and Maribel's smile. Once, he'd been a man running from his past, content with mere survival. Now he had something to protect, something to come home to. They reached the camps before dawn. In time to prevent the lynching and begin sorting out the truth of what had happened. It turned out to be a case of mistaken claim boundaries and too much whiskey, tragic but not malicious. Jed managed to defuse the situation, get the suspected shooter safely to jail for a proper trial, and calm the miners enough to prevent further violence. 3 days later, exhausted and dusty, he rode back into Redemption Creek just as the sun was setting. True to form, Maribel was on the porch, Annie beside her. The moment his daughter spotted him, she broke free and ran down the path. "Papa's home?" He swung down from the saddle just in time to catch her, lifting her high and spinning her around while she squealed with delight. Over Annie's head, he met Maribel's eyes, saw the relief there mixed with the quiet pride she always showed when he returned from dangerous duty. "Missed me?" he asked, setting Annie on his hip and pulling Maribel close with his free arm. "Every minute," she admitted. "Both of us. Mama made your favorite dinner," Annie informed him. "And a pie. She only makes pie when she's worried." "Does she now?" Jed raised an eyebrow at his wife. "Hush. Can't a woman bake in her own home without accusations?" They made their way inside. Annie chattering about everything that had happened in his absence, how she'd helped gather eggs, how Mrs. Hutchins had taught her to embroider, how the new foal at Morrison's ranch was the prettiest thing ever. As they sat down to dinner pot roast, as promised. With all his favorites, Jed looked around the table at his family and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Not the old pain of loss and regret, but something else entirely. Gratitude, perhaps, or wonder. "What?" Maribel asked, noticing his expression. "Just thinking. About how a broken-down cavalry officer and the wildest cook in town managed to build all this." She reached across the table to take his hand. "We had help. From each other." "From each other," he agreed. Later that night, with Annie asleep and the house quiet around them, they sat on the porch watching the stars. Maribel had brought out coffee and the pie Annie had mentioned apple, with cinnamon that perfumed the cool night air. "I've been thinking," Maribel said eventually. "Dangerous habit." She elbowed him gently. "I'm serious. Annie's getting older. She'll need siblings if she's going to have them." Jed nearly choked on his pie. "Are you?" "Not yet, but I'd like to be, if you're willing." He set aside his plate and pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "Maribel Carter, are you saying you want more children with this broken-down lawman?" "I'm saying I want everything with you. More babies, more years, more quiet evenings and chaotic mornings. All of it. Even though it means more worry, more chances for loss." "Especially because of that." She cupped his face in her hands. "We can't live in fear of what might happen. Jed, we tried that, both of us. It nearly killed us. I'd rather live fully and risk the pain than go back to that half-life we were both trapped in." He kissed her then, pouring all his agreement and love into the gesture. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "All right then," he said. "More babies it is. Though Lord help us if they all inherit your temper. Or your stubbornness. We'll manage. We always do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the town sleep around them. Redemption Creek had grown in the 5 years since their marriage. New businesses opening, families moving in, civilization slowly taming the wild frontier. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been, a place where broken people could find second chances, where love could grow in the unlikeliest soil. "No regrets?" Jed asked softly. "Not a one," Maribel answered. Only that it took us so long to find each other. Maybe we needed that time to break first, so we could rebuild together." "Maybe so." A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, and Maribel shivered slightly. Jed pulled the blanket tighter around them both. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside. Tomorrow's another day. And knowing our daughter, it'll start early." As they rose to go in, Maribel paused. "Jed, that first day, when you walked into my restaurant, did you know?" "Know what?" "That everything was about to change." He considered the question, remembering that dust storm, the flying plates, the fierce woman who'd captured his attention and never let go. "I knew something," he admitted. "Knew I'd never met anyone like you. Knew I wanted to know more. But this," he gestured to their home, their life, "this surpassed my wildest dreams." "Mine too." She took his hand, led him inside. "Though I'll never admit you actually rescued me that day. I was handling those cowboys just fine on my own." "Of course you were," he agreed solemnly. "That skillet was a formidable weapon. Don't you forget it, Sheriff." "Never, Mrs. Carter, never." The door closed behind them, lamplight fading as they made their way to bed. Outside, Redemption Creek slept peacefully under the stars, guarded by a sheriff who'd found his purpose and a cook who'd tamed his heart. And in a small room down the hall, a little girl dreamed of adventures, secure in the knowledge that, come morning, both her parents would be there to greet her. The fire in the kitchen stove burned low but steady, warming the house that had become a home. And somewhere in the distance, a guitar played a familiar tune about a cowboy and the wildest cook in town. A love story that had become legend in a place where legends were born from truth and tempered by time. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They had written their own story, one of redemption and love, of second chances seized and held tight, and as they settled in for the night, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew the best chapters were still to come. For in the wild heart of the frontier, where anything was possible, and love was the greatest adventure of all, a former soldier and a fierce-hearted cook had found their happily ever after. Not perfect, perhaps, but real and true, and theirs. And that was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Jed and Maribel's journey from that fateful dust storm to their happy ending. If you're listening to this, I'd love to know where you are right now. Are you driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American West? Please share in the comments below where you're enjoying this story from, and let's connect over our shared love of these tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more romantic adventures from the frontier. Hit that like button if Jed and Maribel's story touched your heart. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more listeners discover this tale of love conquering all in the untamed West. Until next time, partners, keep your hearts open to adventure and remember, sometimes the wildest spirits make the strongest loves.